Okay, well, good morning, everybody. And thanks very much indeed to the organisers for inviting me. Partially because it gives me an opportunity to talk about magic lanterns, which I don't get to do very often these days. And also actually because it means that I can visit this amazing space again. The Royal Institution is actually where I first came to do proper research. I was going to do my PhD on the work of, obviously since I'm Welsh natural philosopher, William Robert Grove, and his papers were here. So I remember coming down, I think, I mean, the place has been changed around quite a lot since then, but I think that somewhere around here I sat down, received my first box of papers, and almost started crying because I couldn't actually read his handwriting. I persevered, I succeeded, I did my PhD, left Grove for quite a long time, and I'm now going to plug a book since my biography of Grove, published by the University of Wales Press and their Scientists of Wales series, has just been published, so you may go out and enjoy it. I'm not going to be talking about any of that stuff this morning. I'm going to be talking about various aspects of magic lantern culture and the relationship between the production of artifact, you know, the artifactuality of fact and fiction, fact and fantasy, if you like, in lantern performance. How did Victorian scientific performers make facts visible to their audiences? I mean, that's really what I'm concerned about here. Visibility, as we shall see, was central to Victorian epistemological practice. Most natural philosophers agreed that the senses were the final arbiters for matters of fact, and that sight was the key sensation in that respect. It was by making nature visible that scientific performers tried to convince their audiences of their authority to speak for nature. The lantern, of course, was a key technology in this respect. It was used to make the world visible to Victorian audiences. But what the lantern offered was not just scientific spectacle. The lantern operated more widely as a key component of the Victorian culture and technology of spectacle. It was the instrument that generated phantasmagoria, as well as the instrument that demonstrated microscopic organisms magnified or electrical experiments in action. So what I'm particularly interested in is the artifactual nature of all these images. How were audiences taught to discriminate between fact and fantasy, as the same technologies generated both? The Oxyhydrogen Microscope, which is this thing here, offers a particularly telling example of the lantern's slipperiness as an instrument for revealing nature. These were magic lanterns adapted with arrangements of lenses, around here basically, that allow them to produce hugely magnified images of usually invisible objects. A sample of Thames water was a popular subject. London's Adelaide Gallery, that's the Thames water. This is slightly cheating. There are remarkably few pictures that I managed to find. This isn't actually an oxyhydrogen microscope. This is a solar microscope. Same thing. That's the sort of thing that they would see. London's Adelaide Gallery boasted that its grand oxyhydrogen microscope, constructed by the instrument makers William Carey, could magnify to the surprising extent of 3 millions of times. At one performance, the flea, by Mr. Carey's ingenuity, appeared much larger than the elephant. A portion of the body of this little insect covered a circle 18 feet in diameter. I think there's an interesting ambiguity between magnification and projection here. I very much doubt that, that the lenses they had really magnified anything by 3 millions of times. But there's a flea being magnified in any case. The Adelaide Gallery's rival Royal Polytechnic Institution advertised their own microscope, also made by Carey, as the largest ever seen. The instrument magnified the wings of the locust to 27 feet in length, and the eye of the fly, which is said to contain 750 lenses, is so magnified that each lens appears to be 14 inches in diameter. Nothing can exceed the beauty with which insect architecture is developed under the influence of this enormous power. Popular accounts marveled at that microscope when the infinitesimal creatures in a drop of Thames water appeared like antediluvian animals engaged in combat. The instrument maker Edward Marmaduke Clarke's Directions for Using Philosophical Apparatus in Private Research and Public Exhibition, it's published in 1842, offers some useful material in this respect. Clarke, whose instrument making shop, styled the Laboratory of Science at 11 Lowther Arcade, was opposite the Adelaide Gallery, and this is the Adelaide Gallery here. He's the inventor of the bisenoscope, a modification of the magic lantern, which an arrangement of mirrors allowed the projection of two images using the same oxyhydrogen light source. He was also responsible during the early 1840s for the dissolving view lantern performances of the gallery that presumably made full use of this invention. One report described his optical exhibitions there as being in a style far superior to any yet exhibited to the public. Dissolving views were a form of magic lantern presentation where different scenes faded one into each other. So Clarke's show at the Adelaide Gallery included, for example, the Tower of London, which is shown under three different aspects. The first, a daylight view, the second with the moonlit effect, which changes to a representation of the edifice as it appeared during the awful conflagration. Things burning down, as I'm sure many of you know, seems to be a familiar theme in Magic Lantern slides. These were lantern performances that required significant manipulative skill and coordination to achieve the proper effect of seamless transformation between scenes. Now, Clarke's directions offered detailed instructions of how, amongst other demonstrations, to display a variety of electrical experiments using the Oxyhydrogen Microscope. He described, for example, how to show off, that's the dissolving view, here we go, how to show off a beautiful illustration of the magnetic currents obtained by placing a small horseshoe magnet between the glasses of the slider and allowing very fine iron filings to fall within its sphere of attraction. So this is a projected Magic Lantern Oxyhydrogen Microscope slide. There's in the darkness at the side is the projection machine itself, the Magic Lantern, the Oxyhydrogen Microscope. And what you're seeing is a hugely magnified image of a little horseshoe magnet and iron filings being attracted to it. In this experiment, the iron filings were not seen falling, but the instant they adhere, they become visible and appear to start into existence at the instant, branching out as they increase into elegant curves, presenting the appearance of an extraordinary instantaneous vegetation. The effect had, as he put it, more the aspect of magic than anything natural. According to Clarke, at least, when this effect was first demonstrated at the Polytechnic and the Adelaide Gallery, it created a great sensation. It was indeed one of the most interesting objects ever exhibited in the gas microscope. This was, in fact, one of a series of experiments that formed a beautiful course of illustrations for lectures on magnetism and magnetic electricity. After early effects at making receptacles for these sorts of demonstrations, from slips of window glass held together with glazier's putty, which, as it turns out, tended to fall apart, Clarke actually has some seamless glass troughs made in molds, which could then be ground and polished so they could show off the effect properly. Clarke also described, I quote, a beautiful series of objects produced by the rapid evaporation of saline solutions and the evolution of their crystals under the low power of the microscope. The method, at face value, seemed simple and required little by way of equipment beyond that normally associated for lantern shows, just a plain glass slider. The trick was to place a large drop of the appropriate solution at one end of the slider with a hair pencil, as Clarke puts it, in a quantity just sufficient to run down slowly when that end is elevated and the plate introduced vertically into its place in the microscope. Clarke noted, though, that this must be done quickly, and all the interesting changes resulting from the evaporation of the water of solution may be depicted in the illuminated disc. In other words, not as easy as it sounds. Again, so it needs skill, it needs manipulation, it needs practice to get these things to work. The overall effect, if the procedure was carried out properly, was like, as he puts it, a chevaux de frise, groups of muskets, bayonets, swords and spears in an armory, and the beautiful arrangements with the fibres of feathers sometimes present. He suggested that the salts of Epsom, Rochelle and Cheltenham, the sulfates of soda and copper, the bichromate of potash and numerous others show interesting varieties of formation. So these are ways of making facts public. As he puts it, happily for the world, the gas microscope affords the means of the multitude enjoying and sharing the most interesting and important investigations which men of science are carrying on in every department of the natural kingdom. So Clarke and others like him were using the magic lantern to make nature visible. Their audiences were invited to see the world through its lenses. And it seems clear that by the middle of the 19th century, lanterns were a routine part of the technology of display and had been for some time. It's worth noting, for example, that the especially designed lecture theatre for the London institution, a rival institution to this one, is, or rather was, in Finsbury Circus, completed in 1819, featured, I quote, a small room behind the theatre itself, connected with an opening over the head of the lecturer intended for the exhibition of illustrative transparencies. There's also a screen for the exhibition of the Phantasmagoria. In other words, there are the means there for putting on magic lantern shows. And it's actually interesting to speculate. I mean, my eyebrows raised when I saw the word Phantasmagoria in a sober description of the lecture theatre of the London institution. Were they showing Phantasmagoria shows, or basically by this stage is a Phantasmagoria just another term for a magic lantern? I mean, whichever you play it the way you play it, it's interesting, I think. So clearly more was going on in these sorts of performances than just simply making facts transparent. The technologies deployed were also part of the performance. When Clarke made nature visible for the bioscenoscope, he was also showing his audience the instrument itself. The technology for generating facticity was also on show. As well as being transparent, something for the audience to literally see through, these performances and the technologies deployed to achieve them were designedly artful. They offered views of nature that are as much artifactual as factual, and audiences to such exhibitions were invited to see them as much as they were invited to see what they were showing. Another popular variation of the magic lantern, the physioscope, there you go, offers another example of this sort of slippage between fact and artifact. The opaque lantern, physioscope is basically a modification of that, provided a means of throwing images of solid and non-transparent objects onto a screen. In his Boy's Playbook of Science, John Henry Pepper described how this kind of lantern, quote, has long been used at the Polytechnic, and some very curious effects are produced by it. The moving works of a watch appear on the screen in Brobdingnagian proportions. A squeezed lemon also forms a favourite subject for exhibition. As the cells burst under the pressure applied to them, the pips and juice are forced out and fly upwards. For of course, in this instrument, everything is reversed. The physioscope's particular feature was that it corrected for this, and this is what the physioscope is differently from the opaque microscope. The physioscope's particular feature was that it corrected for this image inversion, so the screen image appeared the right way around. And this is essential for the Polytechnic optical exhibitor's best trick, which is this, really. Now I quote again, "Habitués of the old place may remember the good-natured, inimitable maudlin simper with which poor Mr. Tate," that's poor Mr. Tate over there, "who was one of the living objects shown on the disc, used to drink off the glass of wine and then wink at the audience." When we say Mr. Tate used to wink, of course it is understood that he was personally invisible, and his apparition or image only appeared on the disc. The countenance is brilliantly illuminated by the oxyhydrogen light, and being placed near the lenses, the rays are reflected from the face into the physioscope, and being properly focused and the inversion of the image corrected, the perfect representation of the human countenance is apparent on the disc. I mean, I invite you to imagine for yourselves just how comfortable it would have been for Mr. Tate with his face essentially stuck inside the magic lantern in actually quite close proximity, amongst other things, to combusting oxygen and hydrogen. So a very nice place indeed to be. So what these instruments showed the viewer was ambiguous. They could be understood both as offering a transparent view of nature in action and as creating an illusion. And it's interesting how the language used to describe these performances often plays with that ambiguity. Other optical performances, such as Pepper's Ghost, that used the magic lantern, were an ambiguous illusion. When its audience saw a ghost on stage, they knew that they were, or rather what they were, or rather what they were not seeing. But even Pepper's Ghost was presented to his audiences as a piece of work that carried lessons about the nature of vision. In its original manifestation of the Royal Polytechnic Institution, the Spectre drama was framed in a lecture devoted to revealing the mechanism of illusion to the audience. It was such a perfect embodiment of real substance that it is not till the haunted man walks on apparently solid forms that the audience can believe in there being optical illusions at all, says one commentator. It is almost difficult to imagine the whole is not a wonderful trick, for people cling hard to the old saying that seeing is believing. And if ever mere optical delusions assumed a perfect and tangible form, they do so in this strange lecture. So they're playing with, is this illusion, is this fact, what's really going on in the performance. So the spectre drama offers a nice illustration of the ways in which the technology of optical display intersected the cultures of science and stage illusion. Further performances by Pepper at the Royal Polytechnic Institution showed the same sort of slippage. Sorry, I forgot to show you Pepper's ghost. There's Pepper's ghost. Further performances by Pepper at the Royal Polytechnic Institution show the same sort of slippage. The metempsychosis illusion, this is a poster for it, which succeeded the spectre drama of the Royal Polytechnic, featured an ongoing parade of mutations in which performers, including Pepper himself, seemed to appear and disappear out of thin air. Objects and people transformed one into the other, a young woman turning into an old man, for example. Like the original ghost illusion, this all depended on the careful manipulations of lanterns and mirrors to achieve the required effect. Stage conjurers like John Neville Maskelyne developed their own repertoire of illusions, using the same sort of optical technologies that underpinned the Polytechnic's performances. What distinguished such performances was not the technologies that were used to generate them. Facts and artifacts were made in the same way. The difference lay in the nature of the performative spaces and narratives that framed the performances, telling audiences how to read illusion in different contexts. So I say, so the technologies of optical persuasion that are deployed across the different performative spaces were the same technologies, by and large. Edward Marmaduke Clark of the Adelaide Gallery produced magic lantern dissolving views and projections of electromagnetic experiments in action, using the same sort of apparatus and deploying the same sort of gestural knowledge, the same kind of sets of skills, to make both technologies work. The technology that generated a magnified image of the microscopic organisms that infested Thames water was the same as the technology that generated gargantuan disembodied heads for the amusement of the Polytechnic visitors. The production of facts and artifact depended on the same range of technologies and skills. Telling the truth with optics was done using the same technology that in other contexts generated illusion. Illusions could either deceive or enlighten. Critics differed as to how these sorts of illusions should be seen. What lessons might be learned from optical transparency? There are as many arguments about the propriety of using scientific illusions to enhance stage theatrical performances as there were about the propriety of illusions as a form of scientific spectacle. Pepper's Ghost, according to one newspaper critic at least, was a startling addition to stage machinery and a terrible extension of the new style of attraction which sprung up during the last 10 years. Their argument was simply that the attractions as well as the merits of the performance should depend as much as possible on the actors, as little as possible upon accessories which properly belong to other branches of art. So as these sort of technologies move around, people argue as to where they belong. Does Pepper's Ghost belong in the theatre? Doesn't it rather belong in a scientific lecture theatre? This ambiguity surrounding the optical generation of fact and artifact, and the ambiguity of optical technologies in this respect in particular, was one of the key themes of Sir David Brewster's Letters on Natural Magic in 1832. Brewster's letters unveiled what he puts the operation of the most important of our organs and revealed how a susceptibility to deception was built into the mechanism of the eye. Illusions mattered because they constituted experiments in understanding the mechanism of the eye. It was the most important of the sensory organs because of its boundless range of observations. Seeing was in many ways the paradigm of knowing for the philosophical tradition of common sense, which Brewster was educated. The optic nerve was the channel by which the mind peruses the handwriting of nature on the retina, and through which it transfers into that material tablet its decisions and creations. This was why the study of optical deceptions and illusions of different kinds was important for people like Brewster. But treating vision as the exemplar of knowledge, made seeing properly, in a sense, and part of the problem of knowledge. Interrogating illusions could be offered as a strategy for understanding failures of reasoning and understanding. It was not only an amusing but an useful occupation to acquire a knowledge of those causes which are capable of producing so strange a belief, whether it arises from the delusions which the mind practices upon itself or from the dexterity and science of others. Looking at how eyes and minds might be deceived by others offered a strategy for working out how the process of knowledge might break down. Illusions could fool even the philosophically sophisticated. Even knowing the mechanism of deception was not always enough to dispel it. So, in his letters, Brewster describes magic lanterns, phantasmagoria, tricks with lenses and mirrors, devices exploiting the persistence of vision, like Plato's phenakistoscope. And it's all about looking at how illusions work, what you can learn about how you think from how you see. He explains why the eyes of some portraits appear to follow the viewer around the room. I mean, think those Scooby-Doo cartoons that some of you doubtless remember from your youth, when the eyes in the portrait move around. I have young children, so I'm being reminded quite a lot about Scooby-Doo at the moment, since they are following in their parents' footsteps in what they watch. Illusions like these were philosophically interesting because they offered examples of spectacles as failures of vision. Brewster's answer to the problem of illusion and of distinguishing between optically generated fact and artifact was to highlight the moral status, the moral standing of the optician. Letters was full of anecdotes about devious priests and pretended magicians who used their optical and mechanical knowledge to fool the gullible. Because the monarchs and priests of ancient times carried out a systematic plan of imposing upon their subjects, and there can be little doubt that the most common as well as most successful imposition of the ancients were of an optical nature, and were practiced by means of plane and concave mirrors. The plane mirror, as he put it, was one of the simplest instruments of optical deception, and the concave mirror the staple instruments of the magician's cabinet. It can scarcely be doubted, according to Brewster, that a concave mirror was the principal instrument by which the heathen gods were made to appear in the ancient temples. The difference between natural philosophy and magic, between the presentation of fact and artifact, was not a difference in how effects were produced, but how they were represented. Since this is Brewster doing what he says ancient priests did, except this is a scientific experiment. Audiences could trust optical instruments and their own eyes if they trusted the performer to tell the truth about what they were seeing. It seems clear that optical technologies that sometimes are seen to acted for Victorian scientific practitioners and audiences as guarantors of objectivity were understood in practice to be rather more ambiguous. Removing the human from the process of seeing was sometimes not a good way of removing the possibility of deception, simply because optical instruments that made facts visible were indistinguishable from instruments that fooled the eye. Magic lanterns, gas microscopes and the like moved easily between performative spaces, or could be used to mount different sorts of performances in the same space. They could be objective and deceptive, and that was probably part of their attraction for Victorian audiences. Fooling and educating the eye depended not just on instrumentation, it depended on the way authority was made. Thank you.